Okay, so I don't have that many slides, so please feel free to just shoot out questions as we're going through. I want to talk about data, dialogue, and plans. So I noticed that Alice was saying that you got recommendations for planning and SLOs and budget, and the three of them really need to be tied together. So the problem with that is if you don't have good data, you can't lead to the dialogue and the planning. So I work with the Dean of Institutional Effectiveness, and he often says that if you go into this and you do a half-assed job going in, you're not going to get much out of it. And we've gotten stuck at East with doing that. We're just finally moving beyond that, where people, it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're not going to do very well putting anything into it, and then of course you're not going to get anything out of it, and then you're going to complain that you didn't get anything out of it. So we don't want to do that. So I'm curious to know, how do you gather data? How do your departments gather data? What types of tools do you use?
Well, we use the government website, the FAA.gov. It shows us the breakdown on our student taking the certification exam.
Okay.
What's good about this site is that they tell us the subject area, how well we score versus the national norm. Are we above average or below? So that gives us a tool to implement changes.
Okay, so you've got a really easy tool. It's built in, but there are lots of disciplines like art history, English. I'm an English instructor by background. There are a number of other ones that don't have those tools built in. So what are you doing to gather data?
I teach for math department. I gather data by giving them like a special, let's say that questions. Then I assess a student's learning outcome by giving this type of question, which is kind of general topic from each sub-chapter. So in order to see that if the students learn the main concepts of each chapter, by giving them questions, then correct them, and find the mean standard deviation of the data.
Okay.
Doing data analysis, see that what percentage of students have like A grade, what percentage B, what percentage C, D, and F. So we can see that if they learn good.
And does the whole math department do it the same way?
It depends on the subject. By subject is different. For example, I teach statistics. I give them hypothesis testing process. So they do that, they answer questions, then I can assess the statistics.
And all of the other statistics instructors do the same thing?
Yes.
What else? What other ways for gathering data?
Well, we're doing rubrics in ESL,
Okay.
and we're all doing those. Yeah.
How many of you are still collecting paper? Yeah?
We do. What we do is at the beginning of the course, we have a examination. And that same examination is given at the end of the course.
Okay, so you have a pre-post.
That's why we do it in paper.
Okay.
Well, in the travel industry, the data is sort of not exactly precise. In other words, we get an awful lot of printed material where the magazines or the periodicals that come out are generally pushing particular destinations, and they're coming up with data saying, well, there's more people that are interested in renting villas in Europe, or there's more people interested in going to South America. And sometimes that's true, and sometimes it's just wishing.
Right.
Wishing it were so. So what you try to do is, like me, I've been around here almost forever in the travel and hospitality department. And it's a case where I have to see what my own clientele, because I run an at-home travel business as well, what they mostly like, and also the idea of what's doing as far as air transportation is concerned, cruising, and things of this nature. And as I say, the data is somewhat imprecise, but you try to work it out the best you can.
So when you're gathering data, there's the old fill out a rubric and everybody turns in a sheet of paper. Wes, am I right? Wes does not have an SLO tracking system?
Not at this point. We're moving towards that direction.
Okay.
We're hoping to have it soon, but most of it is through paper.
Okay. We have TrackDat, and I'm the first one to admit that TrackDat is not perfect, but none of the systems are. I know the coordinator at City, and they have Illumin, and they don't care for Illumin very much either. So none of these systems are perfect, but they can help in terms of organizing the data and getting more participation. Do all of you feel like you have lots of participation in gathering data in your departments? Sort of. It varies. Okay. There are also, of course, surveys. SurveyMonkey can do it, or Google. Rick has done a tremendous amount with Google. He sets up these amazing spreadsheets that everybody can use that have drop downs that you can select. You can put your rubric in there. And then if everybody just turns it all in, it can all be aggregated and then disaggregated again. So there are lots of tools out there, and a number of them are free that we can be using to gather the data. Do you have a question? No? No, yes.
Can you go over the track deck again, please?
So
Explain
TrackDat
but we
is
don't
the-
use that. Yeah.
TrackDat is the SLO software that we have, and basically what it does a number of things, but the most primary thing is it stores all of your courses, and it stores for every course your outcomes. It allows you to put in data in assessment method. It allows you to collect data depending on the type of assessment you're doing. And we're actually going to work through a couple of problems later on. We're going to work through a couple of assessments, and 2 of them use TrackDat to gather the data from instructors. And then it's a reporting software, so you also write all of your reports in there. You can map from courses to programs, from programs to institutional, all of that you can map all the way across. But I have to tell you, it was created by people who also create software for the airlines. So if you've been to the airport and gone on a flight, you know the problems that are inherent in that system. You can imagine some of the problems inherent in this. It's a group of actually relatively young guys who've done this. And I'm not sure why they decided to break out into education, but they did, and they work really hard. I do have to say that they get back to me whenever I have a problem, they get back to me right away. And they're making lots of qualitative improvements. The system I'm most envious of that you should look at is Missions. Missions is a great system. The only problem with Missions is that it's dependent on rubrics. So you need something that is more flexible. I think all of them need something that is more flexible. So TrackDat is the one that we use. And if anybody wanted to see TrackDat, I can give you the information and you can go in as a guest and surf through it. Okay. We do have open access read only so that anybody can go in. Rick, did you want to add anything about Google?
Well, I like your leading questions, and I think what Ananda's trying to imply to you too is that ultimately in this system of demonstrating actual student learning, you're going to have to not just get the data from giving tests, but actually collect it and place it somewhere where it's very personal, so you actually feel like you can understand it and use it yourself, and that it's accessible and to other people and understandable to other people. And you would think that I would be very creative about it, because you should also have it in a very easy manner, like charts and graphs is a perfect way for other people to see things, but I never use charts and graphs. I like it in the line. It makes more sense to me. Mm-hmm. But then I can give it to someone who can do the pivot tables and the charts and graphs and make things pretty for other people to understand. You can always collect it in another way and see it differently if you have it in a place where you can access it. And Google, I use that. I've used it for many years. I just fell upon it, but they make a lot of things for education and a lot of apps that you can use on any device, which I also like to have my data accessible. I can also send surveys to get information from people who don't like to enter our system, and then I can put the data in myself. That's how I gather data from our adjunct faculty. So ultimately, I like to personalize my data for my department from my faculty by keeping it in a place that works for me. So it makes it more pleasant for me to do, because it's easier for me.
Right, and that's one of the things that I want to stress is I'm not going to give you a here's what's going to work for everybody. I'm going to tell you the things that work for a whole bunch of different departments and disciplines. We underwent a shift recently where we now have department facilitators, as well as the campus facilitator, as well as me. And those department facilitators went through about 30 hours of training to work with their departments, and everybody has set it up a little bit differently. They've figured out what works for their department or for their particular discipline. And I'm gonna go through sort of the most common ones that we've seen that seem to be effective.
Can I ask a quick question regarding Google? What are the apps that you're using?
Well, Google comes with, it's, for instance, Microsoft Office, anything that Microsoft Office can do, it's in Google, it's online, it's free, it's accessible from any device. So all of the same applications for,
But when you say that you're using Google to track and to personalize your data, is there specific like
Yes.
software in Google or apps?
yes, specific software in Google, for instance, the way I collect data from other faculty, for our adjuncts, who I don't get to see a lot, but I can send them things that are easy for them to feel like they can do for me on the spot. You can do forms, surveys, which are always easy for everyone and effective, depending on the questions you choose to ask. And so that's one of them. There's writing, there's an Excel type spreadsheet application, presentation software. And so you can make your charts and graphs as well and present them in a different way. I started using a project management tracking software that is managed by Google. It's one of their apps you can collect. It's called Smart Sheets. I just started using it to manage our report writing for natural sciences, general education outcomes. And it's been effective in working virtually with 6 other faculty on campus to collect information from them and actually write the report that way.
Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is the effective practices that work for sort of organizing the SLO process within a department. And as I said, every department has a different process that works for them, so think about what works for you. The key thing is that really at least one person in a department should be organizing the efforts, if not more than one person, depending on the structure of the department. And that person really should be responsible for setting deadlines, setting up systems for collecting the data, collecting and then managing the data, and then arranging the dialogue sessions, and ideally facilitating them, although that can be very difficult. And we have had some problems with that. What's happened is the facilitators, the department facilitators either come to me to come in and facilitate the dialogue sessions, or they ask another facilitator, another department facilitator. Because sometimes they need to take themselves out of the equation. They have to remove themselves from the politics of whatever the situation is. So, but if they can, they should be able to facilitate the discussion. In terms of our departments, Rick's department does the first type, where they have the discipline and / department facilitator, and then Beatrice's has cluster leaders, and then mine in English has course level chairs. So I'm going to have Rick get started in terms of what it is that his department does for department facilitation.
Yeah, I've been on many different angles of it since the beginning at East Los Angeles College, and started just helping to write all of our learning outcomes for our department. Actually, dance just became a department at East Los Angeles College. We're the first in the district dance department. It's actually by itself, dance department. And we will be experiencing our first full semester as a department of dance next semester. We do have 3 full-time members in our department. So it's easy with a small department to have one person managing the information, which is really what happens. Someone has to manage your information not only at the department level, cluster level, program level, and then finally the college campus level. And we're still developing with that. As Amanda can tell you, we finally have a full-time person, which was many, many years in the making. And we need even more, you'll find. But I think most of the things about the department level that I do, I did mention the way that I keep my own data. Again, you're going to have someone who enjoys personalizing it, because it must be done. And that's where the problem's always going to lie, it seems, the issues with collecting and placing the data where it needs to be so it's accessible by accreditation.
Beatrice, you want to talk about the cluster leads, the way those work?
Okay, so in our department, what we have done is we kind of began informally with a facilitator, the point person. When I started at East, one of the things that we needed to do was to catch up and develop our learning outcomes. So I was very involved in organizing meetings, trying to get our department members, and there's 7 of us, to sit together in one room on a Friday, and we did this a couple of times to just really work through the development of the learning outcomes. Our system within the department has evolved somewhat, but we kind of maintain some of it. We do have a department facilitator, and she's the person that's kind of in charge of doing what Amanda said, calling meetings, setting deadlines, or notifying everybody of deadlines. She's also worked with the department to put together reporting, ways of reporting. We do that with paper initially. So we've created a sort of a rubric for reporting what every person in the department, whether they're adjunct or full-time, needs to do. They fill out a form once they've assessed or at whatever level point they are in the cycle, and they need to turn these in to their cluster leaders. So what we've done is we're a department of 7. We have a lot of classes that we offer. I think we offered 49 sections, and we teach probably about 25 or so different courses. And so what we've done is we've divided up the courses so that one full-time faculty member will be in charge of maybe 3 or 4 courses, that they are responsible for gathering and collecting the data. They then will take all the data they've collected and hand it over to the department facilitator, who then enters it into TrackDat, who then might have questions about, you wrote these reports, and she then also communicates with a cluster leader to meet with them. Did you talk to your faculty? What did you come up with? So cluster leaders really are facilitators too, because what they're doing is they're facilitating then the dialogue that has to take place for those classes that they're in charge of. And that's how we've been doing it. And it's evolved. It was something that just kind of began to evolve naturally. We had so many courses that it was almost impossible for the one facilitator, though we've been doing that, to collect everything from everyone. And this kind of breaks it up and also facilitates dialogue, so that you have the folks who teach we're interdisciplinary, so our Chicano history classes. There's one person in charge of that, and that person will meet with all of the faculty who teach the history classes in those sections. And that's how we organize.
The last way that works is with having a course level chair who does the organization of this. And this is what's going on in the English department and math department on our campus. So you have 2 departments that are huge in size. We have 33 full-time English professors and I think 31 full-time math professors. And then each of those have about 70 adjuncts. But you don't have that many courses. You've only got, on the English side, there are 5 major courses, but each one of them has 30 sections. So in what they do is they have, every course has a course level chair, and the course level chair is the facilitator for that particular course. So English 101 has a course level chair who facilitates and does all of the setup, gathers all of the data, sets the deadlines, brings everyone to the meeting, or as many people as they can to the meeting. And so the course level chair sort of works with the, when you have the fewer courses but larger numbers of sections. Does anybody in here have someone who sort of organizes the process in their department?
Yeah, well, in our division, we have several of us doing a little bit of each. Like Kim, for example, she's facilitating our English 101 dialogue. I'm sort of facilitating all of our courses in some form or another.
Okay.
In the science department, they started something like cluster leaders for biology and chemistry and geology. I mean, some of them have only like one faculty or something. So
Right. Yeah, I was actually out helping life sciences just a few weeks ago, or last week, and they do clusters where they break out and they do like all of the bio, but all of the bio courses get together, even if there's only one instructor who teaches, maybe one instructor teaches one particular course, but they all work together, and one of them sort of leads the way.
in the biology, like everyone teaches almost everything, so they kind of like.
Yeah, I think we have some that are sort of specialty. Or maybe I'm thinking anatomy or physiology. I think we have only one person who teaches the physiology course. I can't remember for sure. But she sits in with all of the bio people, and they all work together, and they have a cluster leader who sort of leads the bio area. Yes.
You're going to be addressing how you captured this data, how you reflected on web or.
Yeah, I'm going to show you some models for how some different departments have done it, and we're going to work through the models in terms of how do you then facilitate the dialogue.
Great.
Now, I've looked at, because we now have this system of about 45 department facilitators, I've looked at the way it's working across the campus, and it seems to be, I have to say that it's largely dependent on personality, is how effective it's working. One of the departments that is doing the best is kinesiology, and the facilitator who is running kinesiology is like a go-getter coach, and super organized, and she doesn't take no, and she pushes, she coaches, she doesn't push. She coaches you until you give it to her, give her what she wants. Child development also has someone who is very sort of driven and very well organized, and she sort of whipped her department into shape as well. And she sends out regular emails and all of that stuff. And so I've noticed that the departments who are doing the best are the ones who've got someone who has that personality, who can sort of organize and coach people through the process. And then the last one where it's working really well is administration of justice. But they follow a hierarchy of command. So if the chair says we need to get this done, everybody just says, okay, we need to get this done. They're used to taking orders. So it works well for them too. Does not work well for, that process doesn't work well for most other departments. Okay, so presenting the data. When you think about presenting the data, you need to think in terms of stories. You have to make the data personal. So whoever gathers the data and does sort of the preliminary look at it has to think about, what is this data? Think about the students that they have in their class, and what does this data say about them? This is the rule that the Dean of Institutional Effectiveness has taught me. He always says, this is what it means for that one student who sits in the back corner of class. This is that one student who you're missing. And he tries to make it personal, and you try and make it work for the audience that you're with. Use simple charts and graphs. Rick does like everything in a line. I can't see patterns when stuff is like that. I like to use those neat little recommended chart bars in Excel to have it pull up a visual for me so that I can see in a visual representation, what is this data telling me? And there are lots of different ones. I can't make sense of just plain numbers. I'm just not cut out that way. And then the last thing that I'm going to advise is try to use hard numbers, not percentages. If I say 70% of students got an 85 or better on a test, what does that really mean? And what questions would you have? Well, 70% of what? 30 students? 300 students? 3,000 students? What's an 85 mean? So try to avoid using percentages. You can put the percentage next to it if you want to, but I'm really sort of seeing that sort of, it's almost a cop-out in some ways, because then you can make the data look better than it may really be. And you do want to be honest about your data. You may not like what the data tells you, but you still have to deal with what the data tells you. And we have had that problem where we've had people get their data back and decide, well, we just don't like this. We're going to do it differently.
Are you talking about assessment only at the end of the semester? Because so many things happening during the semester, and people drop because of all sorts of reasons that are not related to the class, really. We have population of people that are working, their families, they have, you know, tragedies, all sorts of things that get in the way. And we constantly look at the numbers of not finishing out this and always thinking that it's because they're failing the classes. And when I started like emailing people that left the class suddenly, you know, abruptly or something like this, I found out that a lot of them left unrelated to the class completely. Change of work schedule, all sorts of things. So if we just assess like beginning to end, we're missing a lot of data and missing understanding the population we were working with.
That's right, and so when you assess absolutely matters.
But we assess many times during the semester, and every time, you know, they maybe reflect on themselves and decide, okay, I guess I can't do it anymore. I can't put as much effort that is needed or so. So, I mean, you'll see the numbers, at least in the science, like gradually dropping and dropping, and, you know, and the reason why we have such a low rate of success is because they can't keep up often. Even if they did well in the beginning, sometimes they can't continue in that level, and sometimes, you know, they started low and they can't catch up. They can't catch up because if they feel on the first part, if they didn't get the first part, it's really hard to move on.
Right, and that's a problem, and that's a problem we should be able to identify through assessment. And the reports, part of the ACCJC rubric when they come out to look at a school is they're looking for comprehensive assessment reports. A comprehensive assessment report would pick up and say, here was our pre-assessment at the beginning of the semester or in week 4 or whatever it is. Here's how students were then. This is how many students we had. At the end of the semester, this is how many students were left, and here's how well they did. And then you can do assessments in the middle to find out. You can add indirect assessments like surveys in to factor into those things to find out how do you think you're struggling with the class? Are you working too much, or are you struggling with time management? And you can factor those things into your assessment results. But a lot of us have been stuck on this idea that you assess with the final, and that's it, or the last paper. And we are shifting our campus now to this idea that the assessment should be more comprehensive and should be broader and should address a lot of those factors and should help us find those things out. I'm going to air some dirty laundry and tell you that the English department at ELAC, the attrition rate for classes is 50 to 60%. So you have 45 students who start the class and maybe 19 or 20 finish. Well, why is it? Are they coming in unprepared? And very few people are doing those early assessments to find out, are they coming in unprepared, so that we can help to explain why so many of them are dropping out. So we need to move to those, but often it means taking a hard look at ourselves and thinking about what we're doing to engage the students and keep them there as well. And I think people have trouble with that. A lot of the SLO process means that you have to look in the mirror and say, what do I need to do differently for students? It's not always just the students. I had a student who stuck through my class even though he was homeless, because I worked with him all the time to make sure that he kept going, because he needed to finish that class so he could qualify for some job aid so that he could get back into a home. But that means knowing your students and paying attention and being aware and making those changes for students. And that's something that people struggle to do. We ask our students to change all the time, but I don't think we ask ourselves to change as much.
Are we not assessing our students by giving them homework, quizzes, midterms during the term?
We are, but I think the difference is when you get that, how are you acting on that information? If all of your students do poorly on a midterm, do you go back and recover the material, or do you just move on because the course outline says you have to cover so much? That's the difference. Is sure, we do assessments throughout, but where do you stop and change what you're doing right then and there to get to some different endpoint? Rick, you want to add?
Also, what kind of assessments?
And
What type of tests?
Yes, what type of tests are you going in and giving? This afternoon, I'm meeting with the business department and their advisory group. And one of the things, I've been notified by one of the members of their advisory group that the business department needs to move away from multiple choice tests. Multiple choice tests are not preparing the students to do real world things that the advisory group wants to see students doing. And so I get to go in and tell them, you gotta abandon the multiple choice tests and do more higher level, authentic, practical things.
It's a strange thing to say that in aviation in past years they were doing the same thing, making multiple choice tests. You have 100% of the class passing with above 95%. Yet when you come to the whole examination component, you ask a simple question, the whole class is like deer in the headlight. Look, I always remind the student, this is surface learning, it's not in-depth. So that's why we changed the whole department into short fill-in answers or short essay answers. And the only time they'll get the multiple choices on the final or midterm, and that's it.
Right, and I don't want anybody to think that I'm totally against multiple choice tests. I think that in some cases when you have a basic content-heavy introductory course, they may be appropriate. But as you get deeper into the learning, as you have courses that follow a sequence, that are hierarchical, that should build on each other, those multiple tests should be going away. It might be fine for your lowest level bio test, but when you get into the higher ones, they should be doing the more practical application and applying what they learned. So the assessment matters as well, just as much as when you get the results, do you do something differently? Do you look at them and say, wow, my students really still do not know how to integrate evidence into a paragraph. Forget moving on to the next step we were going to do. I need to spend another day on this or half a day on this. It really means making your classroom dynamic and constantly shift and being open to that. And a lot of people are stuck in that. My syllabus is set. I've been doing it this way for 10 years. I don't need to change it. It'll work for the students it works for.
That's kind of the takeaway of a program we're using on campus, reading apprenticeship.
Yeah.
That you spend more time in the beginning getting students to be confident of their skills in deciphering the text. And it takes longer to start, but then the rest of the class goes forward quicker.
Right.
And the reason I raised my hand was I was thinking that sometimes when you find out there's something wrong with your course in the middle of it, it is really hard to do anything about it, but you will certainly have the opportunity to change something next time you teach it. You know, even if you can't in the semester that you discover the problem, I mean, ideally you would be able to do something, but if it's a deeper structural problem, then it goes into the next time you teach the class.
Just like at the beginning when Lou was showing your presentation, is the rate of 37% in English.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if the instructors, our colleagues, constantly giving multiple choice tests, there's no any way they could learn anything out of that. Just picking A or B and C, what kind of English are they going to learn?
No, but then I wouldn't have to grade so many papers.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's easier for us.
It's
Yes.
easier. Yeah, of course it's easier. I always say, if you could find a way for me to teach students how to write an essay using multiple choice exams, I'm going to jump on board. I know it's not going to happen. I know it's not practical. It doesn't teach students anything, but it's one of those things that we like to joke about. It is easy to just shove it all through a Scantron machine.
So how are you getting the dialogue with the reluctant faculty? Because I know there are faculty who are engaged in this process and going forward, but this isn't a choice of, no, you can do it, but I'm not going to do it. And I'm wondering how to get that dialogue going with faculty who don't see it as their responsibility in this endeavor. Like, to me, it seems like everybody has to be involved in this in a meaningful way, not just surface level.
Well, it depends. We've sort of operated under this, the people who are at the table make the decisions. So if you want to make one of the decisions, you better come to the table. And some departments have made decisions that have been judged unpopular, so more people have started coming to the table. That's one of the ways we've done it. But then how do you get engaged in effective practices for dialogue? So this is what I was going to talk about next. These are some of the things that are working on our campus. The running email chain. This is something that our architecture department has pioneered this semester, and it seems to be working really well for them. It's something that they had been doing informally for a number of years, but this time they actually formalized it. Now, this is a small department. It's 5 or 6 full-time members and only 3 or 4 adjuncts. So it's a very small department, but what they did this semester, they were really deliberate in it, was they started an email chain, and the subject was SLOs. And as they go through the semester, as something happens in one of their classes, they report it on this email chain, and somebody else may chime in and say, oh, that's like in my design class, why don't you try this? And so they have this running email chain that seems to be working well for them. And I suspect that for a small department, this would work fairly effectively. Social events, mid-semester or end of semester. The sociology department, which is also, it's small in that it has 4 full-time members, but it's got, I think, maybe 15 adjunct instructors. They have a wine and cheese party. And everybody knows that coming to this wine and cheese party, Marcel is going to bring out all of his data, and they're going to start talking about the data. But they initially started it, I guess they were a little sneaky the first time around. They said, come to a wine and cheese end of year party, and then they threw the data. And since nobody objected, probably because they had a bottle of wine open, they've continued this practice. And so social events tend to be really, really effective for doing this. And anytime you have food, clearly, anytime you have food. Life Sciences does a pizza party a couple of times a semester, where the chair brings in pizza, and one of their department meetings is dedicated just to talking about SLOs, looking at results, somebody makes a presentation, whatever it is. Do you have a question? No? Okay. And then the last one is ice cream social. We're actually going to try this campus-wide, either in a couple of weeks or sometime like a couple of weeks into next semester. We're going to try an ice cream social where everybody comes, because ice cream's cheap. And I'm relatively certain I can convince the president to give me a few $100 to buy ice cream. We're going to have an ice cream social. Come get an ice cream sundae, bring your assessment results, sit, work with somebody that maybe you know, somebody you don't know, talk about your results, and start engaging in the process. But again, we've still had the motto that people who come to the table make the decisions. The English department, one of their committees recently made an unpopular decision, and it got into the course outline. And now the English 101 committees are packed. They went from like 5 people coming to 12 people coming. So I think that's one of the ways you do it.
So after these social events, is someone dedicated to write up the
Yes.
outcomes of what's discussed there?
Yes.
Okay.
And we have a form. And
Before the
people are-
second bottle of wine, right?
Yes, before the second bottle of wine. We have a form, and or the other thing that works is have your party in a computer lab and make sure you don't get food on any of the computers, and do it right then and there. The business department is going to try this in a couple of weeks, where they're having a party in a computer lab, and they will be on the computers writing the reports up as the dialogue is ensuing. Some of the other things is dedicated department meetings. You can't escape your department meetings. If you do, you get into trouble. Well, you're supposed to get into trouble. The nursing department does 2 meetings a month, and one of those meetings is specifically dedicated just to SLOs. And the person who facilitates for that department, she leaves the meeting and she goes back and she writes up the reports for whatever courses they're discussing. The philosophy department likes to do a 3-hour meeting around week 12. They schedule 1 3-hour meeting where they talk about all of the SLO work that has gone on for the previous semester. They're philosophers. Is anybody a philosopher in here? Okay, I'm going to pick on philosophy just a little bit. They tend to be a little slow. They want to think through everything a lot. And so they will gather all of their results at the end of one semester, and then they each sort of spend some time processing, and then they come in week 12 and they all talk together. They seem to like that, even though I'm always irritated because they're always a semester behind everybody else. Okay, and then the last one is, this is 15 minutes at every meeting. The English department has picked this up, and I think the psychology department has picked this up. Either one cluster or one committee shares what they've done, and then they discuss as a whole department. So you may be talking about a cluster of 4 or 5 classes, and they're presenting all of the results for those classes, and the instructors for those classes are contributing, but so is the rest of the department. So those are some of the ways they've done it so that they get people engaged and they get the people who they want to actually come to the table. Anybody have any questions about that?
I'm wondering in our collegiality in the district, if we might not be able to have some of the people from our smaller departments come and dialogue with people in your departments.
Sure, absolutely. I don't see why not. We can't be doing things that much differently.
And if we are, that's interesting.
Yeah. And I know that West is doing something really different with English 21 than anybody else in the district is doing. And I would love to hear about that stuff. I know that that's part of the poster showcase and all of that, and I would love to hear that. At East, we have 3 levels of English. So to hear you guys talking about 21 to 101, we've got 21, 26, and 28. We're just trying to get 21 to 28. So we need to get some other best practices and talk to some other people, I think. Okay, when you get together, what do you talk about? How do we know what students are learning? Do we know how they learn? Your assessment should be good enough to be able to tell you these things. You're all familiar with Bloom's taxonomy? Yes? For the most part? So Bloom's taxonomy was designed first so that instructors could talk across the aisles to each other. So that when someone in biology says, my students are analyzing, someone in Chicano studies says the same thing, they all know that analysis is something specific. What people don't always think of when they're designing assessments is that if you're saying students should analyze, your assessment should find out, can students analyze? If they can't, can they apply? Because that's the next level down. If they can't do that, do they understand? What is the material do they understand? And if they can't do that, finally, do they remember? So your assessment should be deep enough so that not only can you tell they can or cannot analyze, but where they're getting lost in the thinking process. And this is a big doozy for our campus, is coming to this awareness that it's not just a yes or no question, they can analyze or they can't analyze, but where are they going wrong in that process? And we only have a few departments who have done some really good work in this. Are they acquiring the skill and values needed to be successful in the real world? So this again goes back to this idea of authentic assessments and how you define them for your campus or for your discipline. We have a definition on our campus that most of the liberal studies people say, well, we can't do that. Our students don't do real world tasks. Well, I beg to differ. In a communications class, if you're getting up and having the students speak publicly, that's a real world task. In an English class, if you're having students write a paper, that's a real world task. In an art history class, if you're telling students go out to a museum and then analyze a piece of art, that's a real world task. But the liberal studies people seem to think, no, we don't do those real world tasks. I'm not sure what they think we do.
I wanted to backtrack to the earlier point you were making about analyzing, students analyzing.
Yes.
And you made reference to the fact that in some dialogues, there is a lot of depth and the way they're accomplishing, finding out whether the students analyze and where they're getting stuck is exemplary. Are there examples you can share of groups that are doing it at that level?
If we have time, I might be able to get on and look for a couple of the rubrics that are being used that sort of track down that level. One of the ones that we're going to try to use in the fall is our humanities rubric for the GE area, and it's based on that concept of, so the humanities, they're supposed to be analyzing pieces of art or whatever it is, and the rubric is based on the ideas, do they have the basic, can they use the terminology correctly, which is the remembering, Can they, I think it then jumps to apply is can they actually, do they remember the terminology? Can they apply the terminology? Can they analyze using the appropriate terminology and weave it all together? And then create, do they create anything new? Although we're starting to come to the realization that at the community college level, students are probably not operating at that level. They're probably hitting analyze, maybe even leading into evaluate, but up at the create level, it's probably not likely that they're doing that. But I'll see if we have time and I can show you that rubric. And one of the examples we're gonna look at did something like that. Okay, so you want to be able to think about what other comparisons could you make to analyze assessment data. Here's where your program review comes in. You've done program review, okay? Our program reviews are extremely data rich. So when you get your program review file, it's loaded with data. It has retention data, it's got success data, it's got it broken down by ethnicity. You're supposed to be able to look for equity gaps. It's doing all of those different things. And you should be able to link up outcomes to help explain some of those things. So for example, we were talking about economics has a huge equity gap. East LA College is 75% Hispanic, but they only have 40% Hispanic students in their class. So why is that equity gap? Why are Hispanic students not taking that at the rate that you should find? And then within the class, Asian students have about a 78% success rate, and the Hispanic students only have a 60% success rate. So they should be able to use learning outcomes to help explain some of those things and help identify where are the Hispanic students going wrong? How do we better serve the Hispanic students so that those success rates are comparable, so that they reach the same rate? So our program reviews are very, very data rich. You look like you have a question.
I just said that they don't come from the same place. I mean, their background knowledge is so diverse. You know, I have students in my anatomy class that already have a master's degree in some areas. I have 3 of them. And then you have a student who barely finished high school. And they all compete or participate in the same class, and they come from different backgrounds, I mean, academically, but also socioeconomic and everything. So
that's when you do the pre-assessment, you figure out where the gaps are, and you figure out how to be equitable in your classroom to address those gaps. It's not about equality and treating all of the students equally. It's about being equitable and meeting each student where they are and helping them all come up to the same place. That's the big shift, and it's a hard shift, especially when we're in a district where you've got 45 students in a class, unless you're in a class where they have other accreditation guidelines that they have to follow. It's a really hard, big shift, but it has to do with where you're assessing early enough to figure out what those gaps are, and then figuring out how to address those gaps along the way. What other data might be needed to make sense out of the assessment results? Do you need to do something else? Maybe an indirect assessment, a focus group, gather more data, look at big picture?
I just wanted to add what she said. The problem is, I understand like what you were saying earlier, that students, it's not always the student's problem, or like they have to solve the issues. Also, faculty have to meet the students halfway. But what I realized is that sometimes you have a 45 students, 45 number of students in your class, but then if you're teaching, let's say 35 of them are actually in the same level, like at least they understand what's going on in class. Then you have the 10 of them really do not get it, not because it's just that they don't have the basic background to understand some of the concepts. And that has nothing to do with, it's just that they're, like she said, they come from different levels of understanding, like maybe they're high school students, or they didn't have the basic math to do certain problems, or the basic English to understand certain things. Then you're stuck, then what do I do after this? You can't stop in class and try to explain to them, because then it will take you the whole lecture time. So now I suggested sometimes to, I talk to other colleagues, having prerequisite for students before joining certain classes. So they have these classes where you have to, do prerequisite to take classes. But the problem is, at a community college, most of the time, anybody can register for any classes.
Right, they're open entry.
Yeah, so then what happened is that this is an issue because you can't, you want to improve the course, you want to improve your department, you want to improve the knowledge, you want to make your students success. Because at the end of the day, however much you put the statistics, what they look is the outcome result. They tell you how many of them is the success rate, or what's the success rate. That's what it comes down to. Then you have all these problems. So I think that for better success, also that you have to have students have some form of level that you can teach, that you can have everybody gradually improve. But if you have this big gap between students, 40 students, and you have that's such a big gap, then you have problem. You don't have that time period to do that.
So one of the things is we talk a lot about putting prerequisites on courses on our campus too. Problem is the validation process to put a prerequisite on a course that hasn't had a prerequisite before is really intense. It's extremely data heavy, and one instructor who is really generous and gives all of their students B's and A's will throw off the whole validation, and then it won't go through. You have to have instructors normed first so that they're all at the same level and so that your grades are all normed before you can even embark on a type of validation that will put a prerequisite in place. It's hard. It's much easier to figure out how to meet your students where they're at.
Well, one area that I'm looking at, I'm from ESL, is language acquisition and equity. Because we don't inform students about language acquisition and how important it is when they come to the community college level, whether they've graduated from high school or not. I've just been learning that some colleges like Skyline are going to use transcripts, high school transcripts, which is just one tool to look at the success of the student. It may or may not be helpful. But in language identification, students don't know that they need the foundation in order to do these courses that don't have prerequisites, and they falsely think getting into remedial English, for example, is a fast track into content. And they don't get the foundation, and then they get in, and this is just a small portion. This doesn't solve the whole problem by any means. But if faculty can identify, oh, this is a language issue that this student is having, if they get a connection to the student and find out wherever it happened along the way and can have that conversation with the student, one student at a time, one student may be served that goes into more intense language acquisition while they're doing content, rather than spinning their wheels in remediation and not getting the foundation that they need. So, but it's a conversation with faculty, administration, research, everybody, because it's an awareness that we don't have, and the students especially don't have.
In response to the young man's question over there, and his concern, if we look behind the students in that particular class to see those 35 students, what presenting skills are they bringing? What English level, what math level do those 35 students collectively have? To look at possibly maybe not jumping all the way to a prereq, but an advisory to baby step it in, so that if those 35 students, let's take for example, if it's an English skills database, if they have 28, English 28, you might look at an advisory to say that you're going to be more successful in my class if you're at this level of English. That's not to say that they would be blocked, but it's giving them heads up whether or not they should take that class. So we need to kind of look at the disaggregated data, and we have a new research analyst on board who could possibly look at your students' course level completion to see what presenting skills they have, and just as an opportunity for a student to be successful.
And just to add to that, the power of assessment is now that we can document these needs, and we can analyze it carefully and connect it to program review, and hopefully be able to request resources.
Yeah, just to let you know, like, I've talked to other faculty members, and like what you suggested is what they say, that they have to find some form of meeting these things, and it's been said, but nothing has been, because like you said, it might be difficult. I'm not asking these students have to take, a class before this to join the class. But what they suggested, what they gave the idea is having a little bit of something for them to meet that class. Because if you don't have the best, for example, I teach chemistry. If you don't have the basic math, algebra, to do just simple, you can't teach chemistry. It's hard, because then how are you going to explain to this? So it's not like these students are not smart or anything. It's just that for them, they have to do that level. They don't need a whole algebra class to do that. But they need that. So I've suggested they have these programs on campus, Project Learn, they do the tutoring or some form of that. But to identify, like you said, a class of 45 and then give them, by the time you already have, because you wouldn't know the student within 1 week, give them a math exams and so on. So what happened is they reach that point and say, I can't do this. And then you have a lot of drop, and you have all this other stuff that's going on. So, I'm suggesting this, hopefully, like you said, something will come up.
We often discourage students, because we don't have the prerequisites yet. We tell them you can't take anatomy without biology. Do you think that they listen? If they're already registered in the class, they have a plan that in 2 years they're going to be nurses or whatever, and they're not listening until it's too late. And we tell them you can't. We tell them even if you got a D in biology, you want to retake biology because we add on that knowledge. That's like something we take for granted. We don't have the time to review all of biology when we do that. The students are not understanding it.
So part of that is making sure your counselors are on board and making sure that they understand it, especially with the new AOC requirements where they have to come in and do assessment, orientation, and counseling. The counselor should be very clear about that and should make that clear. They should be your allies in this and in stopping students from coming through those things.
I find that classes seem to adopt group personalities that are very distinct a lot of times. And I've read what you wrote about formative and summative assessment online before I came here. And I think the formative assessment, I have 2 21 classes, English 21. I have a class of almost 50-something students. I went over the cap, and they're getting it, most of them. I have a much smaller class that meets at 8 a.m., and the personalities are so different. And just with them, I can't teach in a uniform way. I'm in flight, figuring out how to adjust and work with them.
Yeah.
And so every class has a different group personality. It's just not just the prerequisites, it's who they are and who they become collectively.
Right. I taught 3 sections of English 103 semester, and I thought, I planned my class out, planned my syllabus, and I thought, piece of cake, this will be great. I'll be getting 3 sets of essays, they'll all be on the same thing, I'll be able to whip through them, no problem. And then I discovered that my morning class was about where they should be, and we stuck with the syllabus. My afternoon class was leaps and bounds above where they should be, and I ended up adding new things and giving them some more challenging readings and all that. And my evening class was dismal. Just the group of them, they were coming in after work, they were tired, they were hungry, I hadn't done the homework, all of that stuff. I had to scale back and pull some of the things out, and I kept the core elements. They all managed to make it through. Everybody who should have been successful was successful, but it was 3 totally different classes. It wasn't the same class. I had to go in and do different things with all of them. And that's the type of adaptations that we have to have. The other thing I want to talk about, I have to brag about our geography department, is the geography department came rather late to the game. When they finally did though, they came in, they looked at all of their success and retention data, and they talked with each other and said, we think we have a problem. We think that the students don't read well. And so what they did was they did an assessment that not only captured the geography information, the basic content, but also captured the student reading level. And what they found was that 60% of their class was at the 7th grade reading level. And so they were great because they didn't say, well, that explains our bad success rates. There's nothing we can do about it. They're unprepared. They actually connected up with a reading instructor who sat down with them and went through all of their textbooks and said, what are you trying to help students get out? What do you want students to get out of the textbooks? And she worked with the three of them so that they figured out what it was that how to teach reading within their classes. And they shifted their classes so that they now have 10 or 15 minutes every week that's devoted to reading instruction. How do you read the text? What's important to get out of the text? How do you follow and take notes and all of that? Now they're going to do their big follow-up assessment in a couple of weeks, but already they're saying we have higher retention, students are doing better on the tests, they come in prepared and they're engaged and they can participate in the discussions, they're not falling asleep, and they have they really anticipate that their assessment at the end is going to make a huge leap over their previous assessment. And that they're not only, they came in, the students this semester again came in, most of them were 7th grade reading level. It's going to test not only the content, but that again, and they expect that they're going to have pulled these students up to the 12th grade reading level. It did mean they had to think about, how do we restructure our classes? How do we build in that 15 minutes every Monday to do this? How do we give up, I think all three of them gave up a 50 minutes of an hour and 25 minutes for the reading instructor to come in at the beginning to talk to the students. They worked all of that stuff in because they were tired of being frustrated and they were tired of seeing the success rates that they saw. So they really took a leap and they were able to look in that mirror and say, what am I going to do differently? And they've done a lot different. That's the type of work, that's what's linked to the outcomes approach. Okay. How are we on time? We're good? We're running out of time, huh? Okay. Well, maybe we'll only do one of these. All right, I'm gonna do this one. Okay, so we're gonna go through a model and figure out how to talk about data. I'm sorry, what? Yeah, I'll wait till everybody gets. We're gonna work through one of the models. I'm going to leave the other two case studies that I brought with Luis, and you guys can either take them back to your department and do some practice. One of the things that I have is called Atlas Looking at Data. This is a protocol that walks you through how to discuss data and how to sort of facilitate the dialogue process. And I just found this just a week or so ago, but I found this and I was like, where's this been all my life? I needed this weeks ago. So I think if anybody takes this back and sort of looks at this, they can see what's going on. We're going to look at what our Communication 101 course did in terms of gathering and assessing data, and assessing data. So Communication Studies 101 is one of the heavy section courses on campus. It's, 25 or 30 sections large for just that one course. And what they did was, the outcome is that the students are able to perform a speech. They don't care what type of speech it is they're performing as long as the student can perform a speech, because they want to allow the instructors the academic freedom to determine what type of speech it is that they'll be assessing or the type of speeches that they're focusing on. I think there's probably more consistency than less in that department, but they don't want to admit to that. So what they did was they created this rubric down here for the 5 different things that students should be able to do when they give a speech. Analyze the information, have the appropriate speech format, draw conclusions or solutions that are logical, use appropriate body gestures and stance, and then use appropriate vocal skills. And so they have 3 for each one, 3 levels for each one. When the instructors scored the speeches in class, before the instructors scored the speeches, the students filled out their student ID number. and then the instructor scored the speech. And what they did was they turned all of these things into the Office of Institutional Effectiveness, which I'm a part of. We put them all through our software system, and this is Class Climate, in case anybody wonders. Class Climate does this, they do these fancy Scantrons. We put it all through our Scantron system, and we then came up with this overall. Now, I have to tell you that the model I'm going to present is based on just about 250 students. They collected students' data for 1,700 students. But we had some problem. We had a very old scanner for our system, and so we had to hand code most of these, ultimately. They scanned through the system and then it didn't work. They didn't catch them. We now have a new scanner, so this will work better. So when we initially did our data run, we did a data run, they wanted the results right away. So we said, okay, we'll give you the first 250 students that we get results for. So this was the overall data, how well students did in each area of the rubric. And you can see that generally, their skills are fairly good. They didn't have too many students failing. And in some cases, students are passing or exceeding at the same level, depending on the area of the rubric. So then what we did was we disaggregated it by, it's 1.5, use of gestures and body skills. Now we disaggregated it based on a whole bunch of them, but I just pulled the data for this particular one. So we looked at how students do on that particular area, depending on whether they were male or female. And we see that females, when it comes to body gesture and stance, do much better than males. More of them are in the exceeds category. And then the other thing that we disaggregated this particular one by was age, the age of the student. So when you look at the age of the student, what do you see? Where's the gap?
The biggest gap is 25 to 29.
Well, there's a huge gap for 25 to 29 in that so many of the 25 to 29 are exceeding in that area. So why are they exceeding in that area? Why would 25 to 29-year-olds do really well in that area?
They probably already have to do that at work.
They probably already have to do that at work. That's what the speech people thought. But then how come in the 30 and up, less of them are exceeding? They're not all unemployed. One would think that the 30 and up are also at work and have to do this on a regular basis, right? Because we disaggregated the data so much, and we can look at these subsets of data, then we can identify an equity gap. And we can see that the older students, there's something going on. The speech people cared less about this and more about this. And their focus is, and then they pulled data and they looked at the 30 and up overall. And overall, the 30 and up people on all of the areas of the rubric were far more in the pass than in the exceeds. They looked at pass rates for the class. The 30 and up students were far more likely to get C's than B's or A's.
Did they know the 30 and up students, what the demographics were for other areas? Like, were they more likely to have children at home or anything like that? That would have maybe made it harder for them to do like above and beyond type work?
Well, so that's what they're embarking on now, is they've taken this data and they've written it up as a report, and now they're embarking on additional things. They're doing a focus group to talk just to the 30 and up students. They want to find out, you're really not supposed to ask your students, are you married and do you have children? Because what if they are? What is that going to do for you? What is that going to tell you? How would you change your class? You really shouldn't, if you're doing qualitative or indirect surveys, don't ask them things that you can't act on.
But don't you think age group between 25 to 29 are usually career targeted, that they want to jump into certain career? And then people who are 30 and above are usually in a career, or they have something set up already.
That's possible.
Because usually, when you're 25, you are trying to meet certain goals to get somewhere. Well, 30, you have something, so your mind is kind of.
Okay. What else can you speculate about why the 30 and above would do?
Just in my experience, I think when they're 25 to 29, they have more confidence. They haven't been beaten down by the world, by life. And they're 30, no, seriously. And they're 30 and above. And a lot of times I'll find that students who are super confident, 30 and above, tend to be much older in their 50s or 60s, but kind of in those middle years where they're feeling, I'm sitting in this classroom and I'm so much older than anybody else. And I feel it's psychological, and that they're just as capable a lot of times, and they just need to have their confidence built up. Like, you are in the right place, you belong here.
Okay. So you're looking at the data and you're starting to speculate.
My experience is a lot of the older students, they're just overcommitted. They have so many commitments already, work, family, financial, all sorts of things. I mean, they're just more, the younger ones, they have less responsibilities. I mean, it's the work and school, but they don't have a lot of extra stuff. So they're more focused.
Okay, so they've used.
I just want to do a focus group with those people. And, maybe at the beginning of the next class, or if you can catch them at the end of this one, and get them talking about what challenges they're facing and how they feel about themselves and how they feel about the class. I think that might answer some of these questions. I mean, they might volunteer that they're too busy to do the work. They might volunteer that they feel like these young people are looking down on me. There's any number of things they might say, and you might be able to help with that. I mean, one may be really clear at the beginning of the class about how much time it takes to do well. So
now we're starting to get at pedagogical practices. First, you guys, this is working through the protocol. You always start by looking at the data and sort of speculating about why the data exists the way it exists. And you look at the data and you think about all of the different reasons. Why is it that the 30 and up are not doing as well? What are all the different factors that go into it? Do they sit in the front of the classroom? Do they sit in the back of the classroom? Are they coming in late? Do we think that they're older and they have children? Maybe they're coming directly from work. Maybe they have too many commitments. And then you start thinking about what are the pedagogical approaches you can take to help them. But the assessment has to be good enough to help you identify these gaps. If it doesn't help you identify these gaps, you can't ever get to those things like, I need to emphasize how much time it's going to take at the beginning of this semester. Or maybe I'm going to have the 30 and up students go first when they give their speeches, because maybe they'll be fresher right at the beginning of class, or fresher in the semester, earlier on in the semester. You start thinking about the pedagogical approaches that you can take to reach out to those students. But to get there, you have to have an assessment that provides you with the data like this. Okay? What would you do? What would you do next? You've got all of this data, you're going to write your report. Your report has to include a next step.
So, just one question. 30 and up means anybody? Because that's a big...
I know, it's a huge range.
So
I'm not sure why it stops at 30 and just...
So I feel like something is, not right there.
I don't know why that's the way our data system treats it. Okay, you could get more data from your Office of Research or Institutional Effectiveness.
I was thinking starts a new survey at the beginning of the semester. I think questions regarding the age and responsibility and why they're here, what's their goals.
Okay, so part of your plan, that's where you start talking about plans, is what is going to be the next step. Are you going to take some pedagogical approaches where everybody tries something new? Are you going to collect additional data? This is where you want to feed into what is the next step that we're going to do. You start thinking about the communication studies when we presented this data to them. they sat there and they thought for a few minutes, and then they each started thinking about the way they treat the older students. And they said that they often treat the older students like they assume they get it. And they tend to overestimate the skills of the older students. They assume that the older students get it, so they don't give them as much help as they might the younger students. So then they have to reshift that.
This is a slightly different situation, but my doc program is almost everybody over 30, and they got similar data like this about, like from student evaluations the year before about visiting office hours and how almost no one did it, because we all, like almost 100% work full-time jobs and there's no time to get over there. So they pulled us at the beginning of the class the next year. This was like a very easy, low-tech solution. And they said, how many people would prefer that we hold office hours via Skype or something so that you don't have to physically be here? And everybody wanted that, and it helped a lot. They said the grades went up after that. So I think they immediately took data like this about the fact that I guess our bracket wasn't doing so great, and turned it into like a very actionable solution. And they just asked us, and we wouldn't have thought to ask because I think we were all also assuming we must be the only one struggling. Everybody else is doing fine.
Everyone else is okay. Okay. So we tend to we make assumptions about our students, and we need to sort of confront our own assumptions too and think about that. And a couple of the instructors in particular are like, I just assume that they can do it. Why wouldn't they be able to do it? And they didn't realize until we broke out this data that they were not scoring as well as everybody else was. But again, this goes back to having sort of the type of assessment where you're going to be able to get the data that tells you some of these gaps. If you can't do that type of assessment, you're going to struggle with the plans, the dialogue that you're going to have. I mean, this was a meeting that we went into that was planned for an hour, and I think we left after 2.5. And I think they were still chatting because they were so interested. I mean, we presented them with like 30 slides of different data. But this was one of the ones that they latched on the most, the one about the age range and how students, regardless of the area of the rubric, they all perform this way in this age range.
Was this applied to any online classes? Because I find that the online classes, the more mature students do much better than the younger students.
Yeah, I don't know that we offer Speech 101 as an online class.
Because, that's just my observation, that the younger students don't do really well on the online classes, and the way that I'm trying to address that now is that we make most of the classes hybrid. So we have a combination of online work and one-to-one classroom meetings.
Right.
And it seems to be working a little better.
So that's interesting data to find out and to compare. But you have to be willing to harvest data at the student ID level. That's been a really tough sell on our campus. Is it a tough sell here? You haven't even tried it? Oh, okay. You have the possibility. You have a researcher. You have the possibility. So you could do it. But it took about 18 months of us sort of chasing after the chair of the speech department for him to finally, and we had to promise that they would learn something interesting before he would finally sort of make everybody do it this way. And he sort of had to say, okay, Ryan and Amanda have promised we'll learn something interesting. If they don't, we will hunt them down. They promise that we will get this. Please do it.
So the speech faculty brought up this, they created this rubric.
They created the rubric.
Okay, and then they gave you?
They gave us the rubric. We developed this, yes. We developed, this is the sheet.
Yeah.
This is the actual sheet.
Yeah.
We put it into our system and set it up with the student ID number at the top.
So I think that's where we're stuck. We don't have a system yet. Because we do want data. We've requested data, but I think that's the catch right now. Is that correct, Louise? Or
Part of it,
Mary Jo?
yeah, part of it.
Yeah.
We have data in place through the Adobe assessment tools, but we haven't compiled it into one umbrella.
We're not collecting at the student level.
But you don't assume that you have to have something like this. Rick's spreadsheets, which have the student's name and their ID number and their scores on all the different rubrics, those could be used as well, and that's free through Google. You just set up the spreadsheet using your roster, and you've got the ID numbers in there. Your research office, I'm gonna get in trouble for speaking for your research office, should be able to take those spreadsheets, dump the student ID numbers into their system, and run that data. Yes?
I think that's
Okay.
possible. That's what we have a new assistant research analyst,
Okay.
and so we want to work with the office to do that.
It's definitely possible.
I know it's possible, because we've done it for some other things.
You see, like, we all enter our data, like, through the semester on Excel sheets. We could just, if we didn't have to do something with it, we just hand it in, you know, electronically. If someone else manipulated, you don't need to do data entry. I mean, we enter the data continuously, and it has a lot of information.
Right.
Like, why did they drop, you know, and all sorts of, and you can see a pattern, when they dropped, and all sorts of, you know, you can do a lot with that. It's just,
I just think people haven't given it to us.
Yeah.
That's what I'm brand new, so I don't know. Rebecca might get mad at me for saying this. We can do a lot of things with it as far as aggregating it by department or disaggregating data this way. I don't think we receive that kind of data
And
currently.
you have Ajiman is also in your office. He trained under Ryan, so he should be familiar with all of this stuff.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we can do it, we don't receive that information from the faculty if we did. And it's not available in our main database apart from
Right.
grades. So as far as them meeting rubrics related to SLOs, I mean, we don't get that from the university directly. We'd have to get it from faculty.
Yeah, you have to get it from faculty. But it's entirely possible if you're already doing those things, you may want to pick sort of one little subset as part of that spreadsheet and turn that in with all of those ID numbers, and you would be able to get some really cool information.
I think we should be, now that, I mean, Sarah is brand new, we needed a whole full-time other person to even consider doing at the student level. So I think it's probably time for a discussion to occur in the SLO committee and the decisions being made by the people who are at the table. What classes do we need to analyze and run a pilot?
Now, we've only so far convinced speech to do it. We'll see if we think English will come on board next because they're completely reformatting their whole sequence. So we think they'll come on next, and math may actually be doing it and not telling us. They've got something going on, and they spend a lot of time in Ryan's office, but he doesn't talk about it, and they don't talk about it. So I suspect they're doing that kind of thing, they just don't want to admit it.
So then in your track that system, in section level assessments?
You can do section level assessments, but right now in TrackDat it is a bit onerous on the TrackDat administrator to do it because you have to upload all of the rosters in and then set up links that can be emailed out. It's almost easier to do something like what Rick has set up and have one master spreadsheet that you just drop your roster on and then track across, where everybody is using something consistent, at least for the SLO portion on the spreadsheet, and then sort of aggregate all of those spreadsheets together. It almost would be easier. Now, TrackDat is supposed to come up with out with a major upgrade this coming December that will integrate with your SIS, supposedly. Of course, we all know where the SIS is in this district. But it's supposed to be able to integrate with the SIS so you could then link sections and do it that way.
So right now those recordings are aggregated?
Right now, yes. So I'll go back to this one briefly. So this one was an English 101 English 101 assessment, and what they did was they had a rubric. They were looking at the research essay, and so their rubric looked at the appropriateness and credibility, integration and contextualization, and analysis and rhetorical value. And what they had instructors do was report in holistically how many students in my class were poor in this area, how many were adequate in this area, and how many were strong. And they admittedly, they only got about 10 instructors to participate, but in looking at this data, where is the gap? What do you see as the gap?
Can't hardly.
I know it's hard to see. I should have done brighter colors. Students were pretty consistent in terms of appropriateness and credibility in terms of passing. But for integration and contextualization, you start to see a gap with more students being adequate, fewer being strong. And then the gap gets bigger when you get to analysis and rhetorical value. It sort of falls off and you see a bigger gap. Now, oddly enough, English 101 achieved their benchmark, which was that students do 70%, or 70% of students score inadequate, but they only achieved it by like 1%. Okay? So they were not happy with that 1%. We have a lot of people who figure, I hit my benchmark, that's it, I'm done. Fortunately, the English 101 instructors were not happy with that. And so this was the situation where the people who come to the table make the decisions. So the 5 instructors who looked at this data said, clearly students can't integrate and contextualize, and they can't do analysis and rhetorical value. And they added something into the course syllabus, and then everybody, or the course outline, and then everybody said, we have to do what? Are you kidding? And they said, well, yeah, look at our data. This is clearly what we need to teach students how to do. They have to teach a formal analysis paper where they analyze somebody else's argument. And the English instructors were not happy about that. And at the next time it came around, there were 12 instructors at the table. And then the last one was health. Health is doing a multiple choice quiz or test. You want to talk about health, Beatrice?
So they were, okay, so what they were doing was that they were asking, their learning outcome was to examine the factors involved in making healthful lifestyle decisions regarding diet, fitness, weight management, drug, alcohol, and tobacco. Determine responsible sexual health decisions about birth control, pregnancy, as well as prevention of sexually transmitted disease and abuse. All 8 health instructors were asked to report the scores on a 9-question multiple choice test. And so these were the questions. You can't really see them very well, can you?
Well, one of them, the first one is about breastfeeding. And all the students got that. And what they did was the instructors reported in how many students got the question correct. So I think you can probably look, is the biggest gap here is this one in the middle. I was sort of surprised by this one. The addictive substance in tobacco is nicotine. And yet, of the sample of about 600 students, only 360 answered that one correctly. So even with a multiple choice test, you can see a gap. And theoretically, if this was done, say, in the middle of the semester, you could correct that gap. And you could figure out, well, how is it that we've covered this and only half of the population realizes what the addictive substance is. So these two don't get at that student level data, but they still are potentially useful forms for the way to gather data and to start having the dialogue.
And when you're talking about these departments getting together or bringing the data together, aggregating it across, they're also comparing, able to compare their individual classroom outcomes. So, one classroom got that classroom got that question quite right, the other one didn't.
Yes, they should be. They should be looking at that and able to say, one class everybody did really well. What did you do differently with this topic? So our Theater 101 instructors, this is another, I think, multiple section course, did an assessment where they found out that the biggest area students were struggling with is Greek drama. And so what they did was they broke into clusters. I think like 20 instructors teach this course. They broke into clusters of 5, and each 5 instructors is trying a radically different pedagogical approach to teaching Greek drama. And then when they get together, they're all doing the same assessment. But when they come back together, they'll be able to look at how did these 5 instructors do compared to these 5, compared to these 5, compared to these 5. And then to talk about those different pedagogical approaches. I didn't know that they were so radically different. But they were like, oh no, they're very, very, sometimes you get up and walk across the tables and I don't know what else they're doing, yelling out the the Greek drama or doing choral presentations or something. But that's what they're doing, is they'll compare within each of those 5 clusters or 4 clusters to see how did the students compare to each other on that assessment. And then if one of the pedagogical approaches works really well, what do they have to decide next?
Whether they can make everybody use that same approach.
Or something similar. Something, how do you adapt what the one successful group was to the rest? You can't force people to teach the way you want them to teach. But what they said was, we will, if one shows up that's really more successful than the rest, we will all obviously have to look and see, how do I change my practice to use those ideas? That's the hard question. It's the looking in the mirror. Anybody have any last questions for me?
One question. You talked about 3 sources where one was really doing well. It was the morning and the afternoon class, and then the evening class was doing very poorly, and you actually had to take pieces out.
Yes.
How did you ensure data consistency across those 3 sections?
I was using the same rubric for the 3 sections, and even though I pulled some readings out and I spent more time on some of the core readings, they were still writing the same assignments. I didn't change the assignments, but I changed like the amount of readings that went into it and the amount of time we spent on the readings and the writing exercises. So in that class, I ended up only doing like 10 reading assignments, whereas the traditional one had 15, and the one that went above jumped up to like 18 or 19 assignments, reading assignments that filtered in.
So you used the lower base number?
Yeah, I just used It was a matter of, the problem was clearly the reading, was they were really struggling with the reading. So I just kept the core readings the same, and then the assignments remained the same.
The question is, if you adjust like this, when you assess at the end, do the students know, understand, and can take that bulk of knowledge the same way that if you didn't assess and you stayed with just a portion of your students? So you may be kept more, but overall, they're all at a lower level of accomplishment because you were not able to cover. It's dependent. You can't compare all, maybe an English class to science class, but we have a bulk of material that needs to be, when we sign on them, they go to get a certificate or whatever, they have a body of knowledge that they are required to know, and that takes time.
Right, and I'm not suggesting that you lower your standards or change any of those things, but you have to find new ways to get all of that stuff across to students. Because that's really what it's about. I know what the course outline of record looks like. I look at the Psych 1 course outline of record, and it's dense. It's really dense. It's got long lists of objectives. But we have a couple of instructors who have flipped their classrooms and do a tremendous amount of really cool stuff and cover all of that stuff, and their students are generally better prepared than the regular Psych 101, the ones that aren't doing the new and interesting things.
It's like taking a couch potato and ask them to run a marathon at the end of a semester. In some cases, you can't do it.
Well, in some cases you can't. That happens, but think about it this way. If you could reach just one more student in your class by doing something new or different, think about how tremendously your success rates would be affected. Because if you can't think about fixing the whole class, think about that one student. One student, if you reach just one more student by doing something new, your success rates would go through the roof. They'd be great. You'd be surprised at how little, and I only know this because our Ryan Corner, our dean, keeps showing us this. If you reach just one more, look at what how the overall population shifts. So you're not reaching just one more, you're reaching one more in each class, which means you're reaching 5 more. And if everybody did that, it goes up exponentially.
If we can close right door with one last question or comment.
Yeah. No, I was just talking to your colleagues. I know that UCLA has a really good science program, and she was telling me like there was one person there that was part of the SLR committee.
Yes.
And it would be nice if I could get some form and I can pass it along to the department chair about and any information that you can have. Because they are under the same umbrella, so it would be nice to.
They use the ACS exam.
Yeah, I know that. Yes, they do. They have all this. They go to all cover. I've talked to one of your and they tell me all great stuff. So I wanted to get some information. That's why I came to
Yeah, give me your name and your email, and I'll connect you with the department chair or one of the instructors there. I'll put you guys in touch. And anybody who wants to do that, if you want to connect with anybody, just let me know. Probably facilitating these cross-district dialogue is, yeah.
Amanda, I want to thank you for the great insight and